My best friend stole my baby name, so I stole her baby's inheritance. Jenna and I got pregnant at the same time. We'd been best friends since middle school, went through everything together, and being pregnant together felt like fate. We'd spend hours planning nurseries, comparing ultrasound photos, complaining about morning sickness. 6 months into my pregnancy, I told Jenna about the name I'd chosen if I had a girl, Eleanor. It was my grandmother's name, and she'd told me since I was little that I should use it for my first daughter. The name meant everything to our family. My grandmother Eleanor raised me after my mom died, and using her name felt like honoring that. Jenna loved it, said it was beautiful and classic and perfect. 2 weeks later, Jenna went into early labor at 32 weeks. Her daughter was born premature but healthy, and when I visited the hospital, I saw the name on the bassinet, Eleanor Grace. I stood there staring at that card feeling like I'd been punched. Jenna smiled at me from the bed and said she hoped I didn't mind, but the name had just felt so right when the baby came early and she'd been so scared. She said it was an homage to our friendship. I left the hospital and cried in my car for an hour. My grandmother called that night asking if I'd heard about Jenna's baby, and I could hear something strange in her voice, tight, controlled. She asked what name I was planning to use now, and I told her I hadn't decided yet. 3 weeks later, I had my daughter and named her Sophie. It's a beautiful name, but every time I said it, I felt this hollow ache because it wasn't the name I'd planned for her entire life. Jenna and I stayed friends, but something had shifted between us. She'd text me photos of baby Eleanor constantly, ask me to babysit, invite me to every milestone, and I'd smile and show up because that's what friends do, even when your heart is breaking. Then about 4 months after Eleanor was born, Jenna started acting weird. She'd show up at my house unannounced with a baby, staying for hours, talking about how blessed she felt, how Eleanor was such a gift, how she couldn't imagine life without her, but her eyes had this desperate quality I couldn't understand. One day, a letter came to my house by mistake. It was addressed to Jenna, but delivered to my address because the sender had my house number with her street name. I called Jenna to tell her I'd drop it off, but she panicked, actually panicked, told me to throw it away. She didn't need it. It wasn't important. I looked at the return address after we hung up. It was from a law office downtown, the same law office my grandmother used. My stomach dropped. I opened the letter even though I knew I shouldn't. It was a notice about a trust disbursement meeting, language about beneficiary verification, and legal name documentation for minor children. I drove to my grandmother's house that afternoon and asked her directly what was going on. She looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. She told me she'd set up a trust 20 years ago. $5 million to be given to her first great-grandchild who carried her name. She told my mom about it before she died, and my mom had told me when I turned 18. That's why the name Eleanor meant everything to me. It wasn't just sentimental. It was my daughter's entire future, and Jenna had known. She'd known the whole time. My grandmother said when she'd heard Jenna use the name, she'd been furious, felt it was a betrayal. But legally, the trust said first great-grandchild named Eleanor. That meant Jenna's baby, not mine. I spent 3 days barely sleeping, thinking about what Jenna had done, how she'd stolen not just a name, but $5 million from my daughter's future, how she'd smiled to my face while taking everything I'd planned for. Then I remembered something. My grandmother's trust had very specific language. The great-grandchild had to be named after her with intention and family connection, had to truly carry her legacy. I went back to my grandmother with an idea. What if we could prove Jenna's use of the name wasn't legitimate, that it was stolen, fraudulent, not a true honoring of the family legacy? My grandmother listened to everything. How Jenna had taken the name knowing what it meant to me, how she'd used it as manipulation, how baby Eleanor had no real connection to our family history. And then my grandmother made a phone call to her lawyer. And what happened in that meeting changed everything. The rest of the story is on my channel or linked below.